One delay, one missed target, one clause that can change a supplier's profit into a loss and that compensates the customer for foreseeable risks. I'm Mike, founder of Starlit Contracts, where we help you negotiate and use contracts with confidence. We're looking at an important commercial topic in this video: liquidated damages, often shortened to LDs, and penalties. So, what are they and how do they work? LDs and penalties are payments typically paid by a supplier if they fail to achieve certain commitments. For example, if a supplier commits to deliver a product by a specific date and then delivers it late, or they promise that a product will perform to a certain standard but it doesn't, then they may be contractually obliged to make an LD or penalty payment to the customer. The value of LDs or penalties is usually pre-agreed and written in the contract. LDs often accumulate daily, weekly, or monthly, and can be quantified as a percentage value or as a lump sum payment. Should you care? A predefined LD or penalty clause can help to avoid disputes during contract implementation. If there's a breach, then the parties have already agreed what remedy will apply. That means they can fix the issue relatively easily, continue work, and avoid a more costly and time-intensive process to resolve their dispute. Let's look at a practical example together. Speedy supplier commits to deliver a product on the 1st of January. Quick resale customer plans to resell the product soon afterwards. They agree that supplier will pay LDs of 7% of the product's price for every week of delay as customer's sole and exclusive remedy. Delivery was 4 weeks late and customer needs to find another buyer. What can go right for both parties here? The contract states that speedy supplier must pay quick resale customer LDs equal to 7% of the product's price for every full week of delay. However, speedy supplier's total liability is capped at 20% of the product price. Liability is consequently reduced from 28% due to 4 weeks delay to 20% of the product price. Speedy supplier makes payment. The matter is closed and both sides can move on. What could go wrong for speedy supplier in this situation? It's important for contract parties to understand their risks and to minimize their downside potential. One way for a supplier to mitigate risk is to incorporate some contingency into their pricing, or to cap their liability for LDs. Adding contingency to a price means to increase it, so that there are funds available to address the downside of a risk if it materializes. Speedy supplier did not have a contingency or cap their liability, so they must pay 28% of the product price in LDs, which completely wipes out their profit for the deal. Now let's look at a sample clause and some key considerations. Supplier warrants that it will deliver the product to the customer at a certain place and on a set date. Supplier will pay liquidated damages equal to 1% of the contract price for every week of delay for which it is responsible, up to a cap of 10% of the contract price. The first point to note is that the contract should clearly define when the supplier is liable to pay LDs. Note that in this case, the obligation for the supplier to make payment only applies when he is responsible for delay. In other words, if the customer or one of their other suppliers caused the delay, and this had a knock-on effect on the supplier, then the supplier probably does not need to pay LDs. Next, consider carefully the rate and accumulation of LDs. What should be the percentage or numerical value of LDs? In this example, it's 1%. Should the value be based on the product's value or the total contract price? In this example, it's the contract price. Do LDs accrue on a daily, weekly, monthly, or other interval? In this case, it's weekly. And what, if any, cap should the supplier have for their liability to LDs? In this example, it's 10% of the contract price. Let's continue with the clause. Liquidated damages are the sole and exclusive remedy for a delay. The parties agree that the value of liquidated damages is a genuine pre-estimate of customer's loss. I draw special attention to the second part of the clause. Some laws require that the value of LDs be a genuine pre-estimate of loss and not an arbitrary penalty. Penalties are not permissible under some governing laws, so if the rate and accumulation of LDs is too high, then a court could classify them as being a penalty and make the clause unenforceable. It's a good idea to check if your LDs and penalty clauses are enforceable under the law that applies to your deal. So what should you remember about LDs and penalties? First, they're a powerful tool for managing performance and protecting against foreseeable risks, but they must be handled carefully to avoid big losses or an inflated price. Second, determine the value for LDs and penalties, but consider the potential knock-on effect to the contract price. Third, check and apply any requirements for LDs and penalties to be enforceable under applicable law, and finally, try and limit your liability for LDs and penalties to when you're responsible for the trigger event. If you're ready to speak with an expert or to hire a lawyer, then check out starlitcontracts.com, where we will help you to retain a lawyer or law firm to address your requirements. I look forward to seeing you there.